During the 90s and the early 2000s, movie stars were amongst the most famous and influential people on the planet. Definitely the most desirable. Magazine covers, red carpets, and outlets of all sorts were plastered with their faces. Fans crowded the streets to get a glimpse of them during a movie premiere or catching a quick clip with their phones while they were shooting in the streets. Celebrities really felt like the most important people on the planet, ever charming and absolutely unattainable. But then what happened? Why in recent years they have turned from showstoppers to almost common people? Have we suddenly lost interest in them, or have we finally realized they're just like us? Only rich, beautiful, successful, and influential. Well, maybe not exactly like us, but you get my point. So let's begin this adventure on the history of the movie star, and let's find out the reason behind its current state. Since the silent movie era in the beginning of the 20th century, the public have been fascinated with actors and trying to find out more about these mysterious creatures, generating fuss and excitement around them. The beauty of this era was the fact that you knew little to nothing about them, and also that means that in your imagination, they could be anything you want. From the very first movie star whose name was used to promote their films, which is Florence Lawrence, to the peak of this era in relatively recent years with megastars like Richard Gere, Julia Roberts, and Brangelina. R.I.P. But what made them movie stars? Well, it wasn't just, their movies and the success they had at the box office, but also how they carried themselves during interviews, how they were dressed at gala events. Basically, everything about them was an inspiration for people all over the globe. Tabloids wouldn't shut up about them, and fans were drinking up every scoop like water in the desert. Then the social media era came along, and with that, a mirror into everyone's private lives, even the mystical celebrities. We saw their homes, we get to know their kids, with often the apple falling very far from the tree. We read about their relationship dramas and personal struggles with drugs, alcohol, gambling. But most importantly, we got to hear their thoughts and realize a disarming truth. There's idiots all the way to the top. Some celebrities were, just vain and empty. Others were filled with bizarre ideas and, that's being generous. Others were just pure evil. And by posting online nonstop, they finally revealed their true colors. And the public, well, let's say they didn't react as they were expecting. They fell in love even more with some celebrities, but for others, they had a complete 180. Others, again, like apathy took over and they got completely forgotten. Most recent example of celebrities going out of their way to throw their reputation away were, Will Smith and his iconic slap of Chris Rock. Although in Will's defense he's nothing like his so-called wife, not to mention the way his kids have turned out. Another one, Ellen DeGeneres, created a reign of terror on his talk show with allegation of all sorts of verbal abuse, popping up every day, dragging to the mud the career of arguably one of the most powerful talk show hosts in the US, and also putting everyone else in the same position under heavy scrutiny. Or a fan's favorite, Rachel Zegler, who was supposed to be the next big name in Tinseltown, and now is synonymous with box office poison. She was set to steal our hearts as Snow White in the live-action adaptation of the very first movie that put Disney on the map. But between the disastrous interviews, quite few bold statements, and also nonsensical blabbering online and on the red carpet, she quite literally brought destruction upon this movie with her own hands, causing basically the biggest box office flop of 2025 and one of the biggest one ever. What we have learned from all this is that Brie Larson walked so Rachel Zegler could fly. Few more years like this, and she's gonna reach Amber Heard status. Well, we'll see. Now, these days, movie stars have either disappeared, forgotten in the void of once celebrities, like a one-hit wonder band that brings you nostalgia when you hear their one song at a party. They've been cancelled from mainstream media, some of them, for lack of a better word, or somehow managed to stay relevant by either uttering some of the dumbest thoughts you could imagine and also trying to be controversial and provocative, but only ending up embarrassing themselves. Only few have escaped this fate. Think about Tom Cruise. For example, he's still adored by fans for his love of the industry, and probably single-handedly saved the movie industry itself when it was needed the most, which was during COVID. He showed everyone that the audience was craving for some good movies, and they wanted to forget what was happening around them, and they just wanted to enjoy themselves, for a couple of hours, like the good old times. That plus the nostalgia element and the fact that it was actually a great movie explained the extraordinary success of Top Gun Maverick, which blew fans, out of the water and, brought storms of fans back into theaters. It was like the peak era was back again. And then there's this other who, you don't hear about much, but they're always there, producing good movies, and they're showing their love for the craft. I always think about people like Michael Fassbender or Ralph Fiennes. They're never like controversial, or they're never embarrassing themselves, but they're always focusing on their movies and always releasing, I would say, consistently good movies. So, there's still some names that draw fuss and attention, but the interest is clearly going down. And very few fans now generally care about the latest 25-year-old, model that Leo is dating. And quite honestly, his or any other name is barely a box office draw anymore. Few exceptions are perhaps RDJ, which is returning in Avengers Doomsday, and has so many factors at play that we need a completely separate video on that just to explain what this means for the industry. And maybe I will, so just let me know in the content in the comments if you would like to hear my thoughts about the whole MCU thing. Now let's move on with the movie star phenomenon. So what I notice is that in a way, celebrities have become way more accessible. That they were in the past. So what does this mean? I think it's a good thing overall, and it also made them less mysterious in a way. It's not uncommon that you see actors and musicians collaborating with, famous TikTokers to make recipes or, prepare a drink. Like, Nick DiGiovanni collaborated with Matthew McConaughey or Jason Momoa, which is absolutely insane. Seeing them in pieces of entertainment with, random young creators showed their funny and also wholesome side, and strip them in a way of that aura of mystique and reverence that they always seem to inspire. Phrased the way actually sounds like a positive outcome, so I don't think I'll complain too much about it. But there's also another trend interconnected with this, and it's impossible to ignore, and it's all connected to the death of cinema the way we know it. With the skyrocketing prices of tickets and snacks that the chokehold streaming services have put us in, and the general quality of entertainment going down and being absolutely abysmal, the deep crisis of the industry doesn't really come as a big surprise. It happened before our eyes, and we let it happen, without lifting a finger, because it kind of felt well deserved, and also I think it's what we like deep down is what we want. Now, think of awards show and how meaningless they all seem, with everyone being concerned with how they're dressed and what they're gonna say in their acceptance speech. uh, how are they gonna criticize the current government on privileged millionaires talking from their ivory tower about how they're affected by, and now insert the current controversial event where they get gift bags worth thousands of dollars, and they sip champagne with the elite. It always seemed very hypocritical, to say the least. Ricky Gervais really shone a light through all this hypocrisy, and the general public seems to be agreeing with him more and more. The saddest part of this whole affair is to see how the general public is so disinterested in not just in actors, which I don't particularly question, but in movies in general, and or at least in certain types of movies. The time of modest budget indie movie becoming hidden gems years later, and also incorporated into pop culture lore, seem to be over. Now it's more about fast-paced action, CGI loaded, I don't know, like a feast for your eyes kind of movie that you bring your kids to and you just sit them in front of the screen for a couple of hours to keep them quiet. It's just loaded with, quippy humor, and sometimes it doesn't even deliver the joke itself, so it's also not funny at all. Uh, Sometimes maybe unintentionally funny. Just think about the decline of the superhero genre with Marvel and DC that are struggling to get people interested in their movies anymore. And in 2025, they only had one box office flop after the other. Now, video game adaptation instead are becoming increasingly popular and seem to be the next big thing, considering also that the earnings from gaming absolutely dwarfs cinema. They're becoming increasingly popular, and they seems to resonate more with the younger audience, like Minecraft, Sonic, and Super Mario, for example. They had huge success of both critic and box office, while older generation also seem not just interested in those movies, maybe for the nostalgia effect, if they've ever played the video game, but they also seem to have lost, in a way, like faith, let's be honest, goodwill, with all these franchises that they used to love as kids. So seeing this growing apathy towards movies and celebrities makes me wonder whether we're in the deconstruction phase of the movie industry, or maybe the entire entertainment industry as we know it. All I know for sure is that as long as I'm interested, I will keep supporting the film industry and going to the theater, which I absolutely love. I am buying the snacks though. I'll bring my own. Those are too expensive, so sorry. And hopefully, if more people start to go to the movies more regularly and studios focus more on quality rather than sorry, focused on quantity rather than quality, like in the past, maybe we could, I don't know, we might have a chance to save the industry. And also, it will be a chance, I think, to recover whatever's goodwill is left with the audience, and get rid of all the bad stuff in general, so we can finally enjoy the the idea of sitting in a dark room and immersing ourselves into an incredible, captivating experience. Well, guys, that's all I have for today. So thanks for listening this far, and I'll see you in the next video.